A man on death row has 72 hours to live. His final request? Not a lavish meal, not a call to family, not even a chance to plead his case one more time. He asks to see his dog. What happens next will shake the entire justice system to its core and prove that sometimes the most powerful witness isn't human at all. This is the true story of loyalty that defied death, evidence that surfaced at the 11th hour, and a golden retriever who became the key to overturning 12 years of injustice. If you believe in second chances, if you've ever loved a dog who loved you back unconditionally, stay with us until the end, because what you're about to discover will restore your faith in loyalty, truth, and the bonds that can never be broken, even by death itself. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will move your heart. Now, let's begin. The warden had heard many final requests in his 23 years at Coldwater State Penitentiary. Some men asked for elaborate meals, lobster, filet mignon, desserts their mothers used to make. Others requested visits from family members who'd long since stopped coming. A few wanted nothing at all, as if accepting their fate meant refusing even the smallest comfort. But James Holbrook's request was different. "I want to see my dog," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Just one more time. That's all I'm asking." Warden Robert Chen sat across from James in the small consultation room, studying the man who would be executed in 72 hours. James was 41 but looked older, gray threading through his dark hair, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. 12 years on death row did that to a person. 12 years of appeals denied, evidence reviewed and re-reviewed, hope slowly dying in increments. "Your dog," Robert repeated, keeping his tone neutral. He'd learned long ago not to show emotion during these conversations. Compassion could break you in this job. "Duke, he's a golden retriever, 11 years old now." James's eyes, pale blue, still clear despite everything, focused on something beyond the cinder block walls. "My sister's been taking care of him since I came here. She brings photos sometimes, updates. But I haven't seen him, haven't touched him. Haven't—" His voice cracked. James cleared his throat, straightened his shoulders, tried again. "I know it's unusual. I know it's asking a lot, but I'm not asking for a pardon. I'm not asking for more time. I just want to see my dog one last time before I die." Robert had read James Holbrook's file until he could recite it from memory. Armed robbery gone wrong. A convenience store clerk dead. James claimed he'd never pulled the trigger, that his partner, a man named Tommy Vickers, had panicked and fired. But Tommy had disappeared before the trial, and James's fingerprints were on the gun, and the jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. 12 years later, James had exhausted every appeal. In 3 days, he would receive a lethal injection, and the state of Texas would close the case on Holbrook versus State. "Mr. Holbrook," Robert began, choosing his words carefully, "you understand that dogs aren't typically allowed in the facility. There are security concerns, health regulations. I know all of that." James leaned forward, desperation bleeding through his careful composure. "But you have discretion, don't you, for final requests? I've read the policy. It says, within reason and at the warden's discretion. I'm asking you to use that discretion, please." Robert thought of his own dog, a rescue mutt named Charlie who greeted him every evening with the kind of uncomplicated joy that made the darkness of his work bearable. He thought about coming home to an empty house, about never seeing Charlie again, about dying without one last chance to feel that warm weight against his side. "I'll need to speak with your sister," he said finally. "I'll need veterinary records proving the dog is healthy, up to date on vaccinations. I'll need to arrange security protocols." James's hands, which had been clenched on the table, slowly relaxed. "But I'm not promising anything," Robert added quickly. Even if I approve it, there are others who need to sign off. The deputy director, legal counsel. If anyone objects, I understand. Thank you. James's voice was thick. Thank you for considering it. Robert stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Guards appeared at the door to escort James back to his cell. But as the condemned man rose, Robert found himself asking a question he knew he shouldn't. Why the dog? Why not your sister? Your parents? James paused at the threshold, the guards flanking him like shadows. Because Duke is the only one who never stopped believing I was innocent, he said quietly. Because every time my sister brought photos, he was looking at the camera like he was looking for me. Because he's been waiting 12 years for me to come home, and the least I can do is tell him goodbye. The door closed with a hollow clang that echoed down the corridor. Robert sat alone in the consultation room, James Holbrook's words hanging in the air like smoke. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd committed to memory years ago. Sarah, it's Robert. I need to ask you something unusual. Sarah Holbrook, James's younger sister, 37 years old, a high school teacher who'd spent 12 years visiting her brother every month, answered on the second ring. Is it about James? Is he okay? He's fine. Well, as fine as anyone can be in his situation. Robert hesitated. He's asked to see Duke. As his final request. Silence on the other end. Then, oh God. I need to know if you're willing to bring the dog. I need vet records. Yes, Sarah's voice was fierce. Yes, I'll bring him. Whatever you need. When? Tomorrow afternoon. I'll email you the requirements. Robert paused. Ms. Holbrook, I need you to understand something. This doesn't change anything. Your brother's execution is still scheduled for Friday at 6 p.m. This is just a kindness. Kindness? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're going to kill my brother for something he didn't do, but sure, let's call letting him see his dog a kindness. Robert had heard these protestations before, the desperate insistence of family members who couldn't accept guilt, couldn't surrender hope. He'd learned to let them wash over him without response. But something in Sarah Holbrook's voice made him pause. You really believe he's innocent? I know he's innocent. I was there that night, Warden Chen. I was at James's apartment when the police came. I saw his face when they told him what happened. That wasn't the face of a guilty man. That was the face of someone whose worst nightmare just came true. The evidence? The evidence was circumstantial. The gun had been stolen from Tommy Vickers' truck 2 weeks before the robbery. Tommy was the one with the criminal record, the one with the motive. James was just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong friend. Then why didn't the jury believe him? Another pause, longer this time. Because Tommy Vickers was the son of a state senator. Because the district attorney needed a conviction before the election. Because sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as the story people want to hear. Sarah's voice hardened. I'll bring Duke tomorrow at 2 p.m. And Warden Chen, thank you. Whatever else happens, thank you for giving my brother this. She hung up before he could respond. Robert sat in the empty room, staring at his phone. He thought about 12 years of appeals, 12 years of evidence review, 12 years of judges and lawyers and investigators examining every detail of the case. Could they all have been wrong? He pulled up James Holbrook's file on his computer and began to read, not as a warden reviewing a condemned man's history, but as someone looking for cracks in a story everyone had accepted as truth. The next afternoon, Sarah Holbrook arrived at Coldwater with a golden retriever who moved slowly, his muzzle gray with age. Duke walked with the careful gait of an old dog, but his tail still wagged when he entered the facility, as if he remembered this place meant something important. Robert watched through the security camera as they processed Sarah and Duke through 3 checkpoints. The dog submitted to the examination with patient dignity, standing still while guards checked him with handheld metal detectors, sitting calmly while a veterinarian verified his health records. "He's clear," the vet confirmed. "Healthy for his age, no concerns." Robert had arranged for the meeting to take place in a small outdoor courtyard normally reserved for staff breaks. It wasn't much, a patch of grass, a few benches, walls topped with razor wire, but it was the closest thing to normal space the facility offered. James was already waiting when they brought Duke through the final door. Robert had warned him, told him to stay seated until the dog was secured, to follow protocol, to remember where he was. But the moment Duke appeared, all of that evaporated. James stood, and Duke's head whipped around, his whole body suddenly alert. For a moment, neither moved. Man and dog, separated by 30 feet and 12 years and a chasm of loss too deep to measure. Then Duke pulled against the leash with a strength that belied his age, and Sarah let go, and the dog ran. He ran the way old dogs run, awkward, shambling, but unstoppable. He ran like the years meant nothing, like arthritis and gray muzzles and long separation were just details that couldn't compete with recognition. He ran toward the man who'd raised him from a puppy, the man who'd thrown tennis balls and filled food bowls and been the center of his universe. And James, who'd maintained rigid composure through 12 years of confinement, who'd faced his execution date with steady acceptance, James fell to his knees and sobbed. Duke hit him like a golden tidal wave, nearly knocking him over. The dog's paws were on his shoulders, his tongue washing over James's face, his whole body wiggling with joy so pure it hurt to witness. "Hey, buddy," James gasped, his arms wrapping around Duke's neck. "Hey, boy. I missed you. God, I missed you so much." Duke whined, high and desperate, a sound that spoke of years of waiting, of doors that opened for strangers, of an emptiness that wouldn't heal. He pressed against James like he was trying to merge with him, to become one being that couldn't be separated again. Sarah stood at the edge of the courtyard, tears streaming down her face. The guards, hardened men who'd seen everything, looked away, their expressions carefully neutral. Robert watched from the doorway, and something in his chest that had been calcified for years began to crack. This wasn't the reunion of a guilty man with his pet. This was something else, something that spoke of innocence in a language deeper than evidence. Duke finally calmed enough to sit, pressing against James's side, his head on James's lap. James's hands moved over the dog's fur with the reverence of someone memorizing sacred text. "You got old," James whispered. "You're all gray now." Duke's tail thumped against the ground. "I'm sorry I left you. I'm so sorry." The dog licked his hand, once, twice, 3 times, forgiveness and love and simple presence all contained in that gesture. They sat like that for 30 minutes. Robert had authorized an hour, but he found himself reluctant to end it, reluctant to break whatever spell had fallen over the courtyard. Finally, Sarah approached, kneeling beside her brother. "James, there's something you need to know," she said quietly. "Something I found." James looked up, his hand still moving over Duke's fur. "What?" "Tommy Vickers. He's been living in Mexico for the past 11 years, under an assumed name." Sarah pulled a folder from her bag, papers, photographs, printouts. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago, used every penny I had, and he found him." Robert stepped forward, his warden's instincts overriding everything else. "Ms. Holbrook, if you have new evidence..." "I presented it to the appeals court. They denied it, said it was too late, that procedural deadlines had passed, that it didn't constitute sufficient grounds for a stay of execution." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she held the folder. "But I brought copies for you, because I thought maybe if you saw..." She trailed off, knowing how unlikely it was. How final these things were. How the system, once set in motion, rarely reversed course. But Robert took the folder, And as he opened it and began to read, began to see the documented evidence of Tommy Vickers living under a false identity, the bank records showing large deposits that coincided with his disappearance, the witness statements Sarah had collected from people who'd seen Tommy in that convenience store arguing with the clerk days before the robbery. Something shifted in his understanding. "This needs to go to the governor's office," he said. "Immediately. I sent it 3 weeks ago. No response." Robert looked at James, still kneeling in the grass with his dog, looked at Duke, who'd waited 12 years for this reunion, looked at Sarah, who'd spent her life savings chasing a truth no one wanted to hear. And he made a decision that could cost him his career. "I'm calling the Attorney General," he said, "personally, and I'm recommending an emergency stay of execution pending review of this evidence." James's head snapped up. "What?" "I can't promise anything. The decision isn't mine. But I can put it in front of people who can make that decision." Robert met James's eyes. "And I can tell them that after 23 years in this job, I've learned to recognize the difference between guilt and innocence. Whatever else is true, Mr. Holbrook, you don't deserve to die on Friday." Sarah's sob was audible across the courtyard. Duke, sensing the shift in emotion, pushed closer to James, his tail wagging harder. And James buried his face in his dog's fur and let himself hope for the first time in 12 years. But hope, Robert knew, was dangerous. Hope could break you worse than despair ever could. The question was, would it be enough? The Attorney General's office was closed by the time Robert made his first call. He left a message, professional, urgent, carefully worded to avoid overstepping his authority. Then he called the Deputy AG's personal cell, a number he'd acquired years ago during a hostage situation that had required coordination between corrections and state law enforcement. Michael Zhang answered on the fourth ring, his voice carrying the distracted tone of someone interrupted during dinner. "Warden Chen, this is unexpected. I apologize for calling after hours, but I have a situation that requires immediate attention." Robert explained quickly. The execution scheduled for Friday, the new evidence Sarah Holbrook had compiled, the fact that appeals courts had dismissed it on procedural grounds without examining its merit. "And you're calling me because—" Michael's tone had shifted from distracted to wary. "Because I think we're about to execute an innocent man, and because I've read the evidence, and it's substantial enough that I can't, in good conscience, proceed without someone at the state level reviewing it." Silence. Robert could hear voices in the background, family probably. A normal evening interrupted by the machinery of justice. "You understand what you're asking," Michael said finally. "A stay of execution 3 days out requires the governor's signature. To get the governor's signature, I need to convince him that there's genuine doubt about the conviction. To do that, I need to review this evidence personally, present it to the AG, and build a case strong enough to overcome 12 years of legal precedent saying this man is guilty." "I understand." "And you're willing to stake your professional reputation on this?" Robert thought of James Holbrook kneeling in the grass, arms wrapped around his dog. Thought of Duke's desperate joy, the kind of loyalty that transcended time and circumstance. Thought of Sarah's words. Sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as the story people want to hear. "Yes," he said, "I'm willing to stake everything on it." Another pause. Longer this time. "Email me everything you have. I'll review it tonight. If it's as substantial as you say, I'll drive to Huntsville first thing in the morning." Michael's voice hardened. "But Warden, if this is some emotional reaction, if you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment—" "This isn't sentiment. This is evidence." "Then send it, now." Robert spent the next hour scanning Sarah's documents, compiling his own observations, writing a detailed memo outlining why he believed James Holbrook's case warranted emergency review. He attached photographs from the courtyard visit, not to manipulate emotions, but to document the meeting, to provide context. At 11:47 p.m., he hit send. Then he sat in his office, staring at the wall, and wondered if he'd just destroyed his career for nothing. Michael Zhang arrived at Coldwater at 8:15 the next morning, accompanied by 2 assistant attorneys general and a woman Robert recognized from news coverage. Diana Foster, the state's most prominent criminal justice reform advocate. "I brought backup," Michael said by way of greeting. "This evidence is concerning." They set up in the warden's conference room, spreading documents across the table like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for 12 years. Robert sat at the head of the table, answering questions, providing context, watching as the lawyers dissected every detail of the case he'd studied the night before. Tommy Vickers's trail was documented in Sarah's investigation with impressive thoroughness. She'd found his false identity, Thomas Victor, through a combination of old social media posts, facial recognition software, and sheer determination. Bank records showed deposits totaling nearly $200,000 over the past 11 years, money that appeared to originate from offshore accounts linked to his father's business interests. "Hush money," Diana said, tapping the financial statements. "Someone paid Tommy Vickers to disappear." "His father," Michael agreed. Senator Richard Vickers, who was up for re-election the year of the robbery, who couldn't afford to have his son implicated in a murder. So he let James Holbrook take the fall instead. Diana's voice was cold. Hired lawyers to fight James's defense, made sure the evidence pointed away from Tommy, facilitated his son's escape to Mexico. One of the assistant AGs, a young woman named Patricia Kim, looked up from the witness statements. "These people all saw Tommy arguing with the store clerk days before the robbery. One says they heard Tommy threaten him over some gambling debt. Why wasn't this brought up at trial?" "Look at the dates," Robert said. "These witnesses were interviewed by Sarah's investigator last year, 12 years after the fact." "They weren't called during the original investigation?" "They weren't found during the original investigation, or if they were, their statements were buried." Michael pulled up another document on his laptop. "I pulled the original case files this morning. 3 of these witnesses gave statements to police at the time. None of those statements made it to the defense." "That's prosecutorial misconduct," Patricia said. "That's a death sentence waiting to happen," Diana corrected. "Because by the time anyone noticed, it was too late to file appeals on those grounds." The room fell silent. Robert could see the lawyers processing the implications, not just for James Holbrook, but for the system itself. For the prosecutors who'd buried evidence, the judges who'd denied appeals, the machinery of justice that had ground forward despite the cracks in its foundation. "What about the gun?" Michael asked. James's fingerprints were on the weapon. "Tommy's gun," Robert said. "Stolen from his truck 2 weeks before the robbery. James admitted to handling it when Tommy first bought it. They went to a shooting range together. That's where the prints came from." "Did the defense argue that?" "They tried. Jury didn't buy it. With Tommy disappeared and James's prints on the gun, it was easier to believe James was guilty than to accept that the senator's son was a murderer." Patricia looked up from her notes. "We need to find Tommy Vickers. Get him to testify." "Good luck with that," Diana said. "He's been hiding for 12 years. He's not going to suddenly develop a conscience." "He doesn't need a conscience," Michael replied. "He just needs to be found. Once he's on record as being alive and in Mexico, once we can document his father's payments, the whole case collapses." "That takes time. We have—" Patricia checked her watch. 61 hours until the execution." The weight of that deadline settled over the room like a physical presence. "Then we work fast," Michael said. He turned to Robert. "I need to interview James Holbrook, personally, and I need to call the governor." James was brought to the conference room at noon, still in his prison jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked between the assembled lawyers with confusion that slowly shifted to cautious hope. "Mr. Holbrook," Michael said, "I'm Michael Zhang, Deputy Attorney General. We're reviewing the new evidence in your case. I need to ask you some questions about the night of the robbery. For the next 2 hours, James recounted the story he'd told a dozen times before. How Tommy had called him that night, said he needed help moving some equipment for a construction job. How James had driven to meet him, found Tommy agitated and paranoid. How Tommy had driven them to the convenience store, told James to wait in the car, gone inside alone. "I heard the shot," James said, his voice steady but strained from repetition. "I heard it, and I got out of the car, and I saw Tommy running. He threw something at me. I didn't realize it was the gun until later. And then he was gone. Just gone. I went inside, and the clerk was on the floor, and there was blood everywhere, and I tried to help him, but—" His voice broke. He took a breath, continued. "The police found me there, with the gun in my hand, and no matter how many times I explained what happened, no one believed me." "Because Tommy had disappeared," Michael said. "Because Tommy's father made him disappear. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I thought Tommy panicked and ran. I thought he'd come back, explain what really happened. I kept waiting for him to come forward during the trial." James laughed bitterly. "I was so stupid, so naive. I actually believed the truth would matter." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Holbrook, if we can find Tommy Vickers, if we can get him to testify or even just document his location and his father's payments, then I might not die on Friday." James met her eyes. "But you won't find him. Not in time. Senator Vickers has spent 12 years and probably millions of dollars making sure his son stays hidden. You think he's going to let you undo all of that in 60 hours? "We have to try," Michael said. "Why?" The question was genuine, not bitter. "Why now? What changed?" Michael glanced at Robert, who'd remained silent throughout the interview. "The warden called me," Michael said, "after reviewing your sister's evidence, after meeting with you yesterday." "After I saw Duke," James said quietly. He looked at Robert. "That's what changed, isn't it? You saw something that made you doubt." Robert chose his words carefully. "I saw a man who's spent 12 years maintaining his innocence, a sister who's spent her life savings proving it, and a dog who's been waiting for someone who never came home. That combination, it made me look closer. A dog." James's smile was sad. "After 12 years, appeals, lawyers, investigators, it took a dog to make someone listen." "Animals don't lie," Diana said softly. "They can't be manipulated or coerced or convinced to believe a story. They just know who their people are. And Duke knew you were his people. Still knows it even after all this time." James's hands, cuffed on the table, clenched into fists. "If you can't find Tommy in time," he said, "I want you to know I don't blame you. Any of you. You're doing more than anyone else has done in 12 years. And you gave me yesterday. You gave me one more day with Duke. That's more than I expected." "We're going to find him," Patricia said with fierce determination. "We're going to stop this." But as guards led James back to his cell, Robert saw the truth in the condemned man's eyes. James didn't believe them. James had given up on miracles a long time ago. The call to the governor's office happened at 3:00 p.m. Michael made it from Robert's office, speakerphone engaged so everyone could hear. The governor's chief of staff, a man named Harold Brennan, listened to the presentation with professional courtesy and increasing skepticism. "Let me make sure I understand," Harold said when Michael finished. "You want the governor to issue a stay of execution 3 days out, based on evidence that's been available for months and was already reviewed and denied by the appeals court." "The appeals court denied it on procedural grounds," Michael corrected. "They didn't evaluate the merit of the evidence. We're asking for that evaluation to happen now before it's too late. The execution has been scheduled for 6 months. The victim's family has been notified. The press is already covering it. And you want the governor to intervene at the last minute because a warden got emotional after watching a prisoner pet his dog? Robert felt his jaw tighten. This isn't about emotion. This is about evidence of actual innocence. Evidence compiled by the defendant's sister, Harold countered. Evidence that conveniently surfaces right before the execution date. Evidence that requires us to believe a sitting U.S. senator orchestrated a cover-up to protect his son. Former senator, Diana interjected. Richard Vickers lost his seat in the next election. And we're not asking you to believe anything without proof. We're asking for time to gather that proof. How much time? Michael and Patricia exchanged glances. 30 days? Maybe 60? Long enough to locate Tommy Vickers, document his location, interview witnesses. So you want an indefinite stay. You want the governor to suspend an execution that's been upheld by every court that's reviewed it, on the possibility that you might find evidence that might prove innocence. Harold's voice was flat. Do you understand the political implications of that? Do you understand how it would look if the governor intervened now, at the request of the same criminal justice reform advocates who've been attacking his record on law and order? I understand how it would look if we execute an innocent man, Michael shot back. Silence on the other end of the line. When Harold spoke again, his voice was quieter, more careful. I'll present it to the governor, but I need to be honest with you, Deputy Zhang. The odds of him granting a stay based on what you've presented are almost zero. He's up for re-election next year. His opponent is already running ads about being soft on crime. If he stops this execution, it becomes the defining issue of the campaign. And if we kill an innocent man? Diana asked. Then we deal with the fallout if and when definitive proof emerges, which realistically it probably won't. These things have a way of staying buried. Harold sighed. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I'm being straight with you about the political realities. People's lives shouldn't depend on political realities, Patricia said. But they do. They always have. And until that changes, Harold let the sentence hang. I'll call you back within 2 hours with the governor's decision. The line went dead. Robert looked around the room at the assembled lawyers and advocates. They looked tired, defeated, like soldiers who'd fought hard and were beginning to realize they were going to lose anyway. There has to be something else we can do, Patricia said. Some other avenue. Federal habeas corpus petition, Michael said. But James already exhausted that route. Unless we have new evidence, actual physical documented new evidence, no federal judge is going to grant a stay this close to execution. What about public pressure? Diana suggested. Media coverage? If we can make this story go viral? We have 48 hours, Michael interrupted. Even if we could generate that kind of attention, it wouldn't change the legal reality. The governor is the only person who can stop this now. Robert stood, walked to the window. Outside, the prison yard was empty. A vast expanse of concrete and razor wire, neutral and indifferent to the human dramas unfolding within its walls. He thought of James in his cell, probably sitting quietly, probably expecting nothing. Thought of Duke at Sarah's house, probably sleeping in a patch of sunlight, dreaming of the reunion that had been too brief. And he thought of the question James had asked. Why now? What changed? The truth was, nothing had changed except Robert's willingness to see what had been there all along. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Holbrook. Thank you for trying. Whatever happens, you gave James hope. That's more than anyone else has done. Robert closed his eyes and made a decision. I'm going to the media myself, he said, turning back to face the room. I'm going to hold a press conference. And I'm going to tell them that in my professional opinion, Texas is about to execute an innocent man. Michael stood. Warden, that's career suicide. The Department of Corrections will have your job before the day is out. Then they'll have my job. But at least I'll know I did everything I could. Diana was already pulling out her phone. I can have reporters here in an hour. National outlets. This becomes a story. It changes the calculus. Or it makes the governor dig in harder, Patricia warned. Public pressure can backfire. Make it look like he's caving to activists. I don't care how it looks, Robert said. I care about stopping an execution that shouldn't happen. And if the only tool I have left is my voice, then I'm going to use it. The phone on Robert's desk rang. They all stared at it. 2 hours hadn't passed yet. Harold Brennan had promised 2 hours. Robert answered. Warden Chen. It's Harold. I spoke with the governor. A pause that stretched like wire pulled taut. He's denying the stay. The room seemed to tilt. Robert gripped the edge of his desk. Did he review the evidence? He reviewed my summary of your conversation. He said that without physical proof of Tommy Vickers' location, without a confession or testimony, there's insufficient grounds to intervene. He said, Harold hesitated. He said that the courts have spoken, and he's not going to override 12 years of legal process based on speculation. This isn't speculation. I know. I told him that. But his mind is made up. Harold's voice softened slightly. For what it's worth, Warden, I believe you. I think your instincts are right, but belief isn't enough. Not in this system. The line went dead. Robert set down the phone with careful precision, as if it were made of glass. We're out of time, he said. We're out of options. No. Patricia was already on her laptop, typing furiously. There's still the federal petition. If we can file tonight, get it in front of a judge first thing tomorrow. On what grounds? Michael asked gently. We don't have new evidence. We have the same evidence the appeals court already rejected. Then we manufacture grounds. We argue ineffective assistance of counsel. We argue... Patricia. Michael's voice was firm but kind. It's over. Unless Tommy Vickers walks through that door in the next 48 hours, James Holbrook is going to die. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Diana spoke, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. Not walks through the door, walks into a camera. Everyone turned to look at her. What if we can't bring Tommy here? Diana continued, speaking faster as the idea took shape. But we can bring him to the public? What if we can get footage of him? Proof he's alive, proof he's been hiding, proof his father paid him off. How? Patricia demanded. We don't even know exactly where in Mexico he is. But Sarah's investigator does. He found him once. He can find him again. Diana was already dialing. And if we get footage, if we get Tommy Vickers on camera, even if he doesn't say a word, that becomes evidence. That becomes grounds for a stay. It was desperate. It was a long shot that bordered on impossible. But it was something. And something, right now, was better than nothing. The investigator's name was Marcus Reed, and he answered Diana's call from a burner phone somewhere in Jalisco. You want me to do what? His voice crackled with disbelief. Find Tommy Vickers again. Get footage of him. Something we can use to prove he's alive and in hiding. Diana had Marcus on speaker. The assembled group crowded around the phone. We need it in the next 24 hours. 24 hours? Lady, it took me 3 months to track him down the first time. And that was when I had time to be careful, to not spook him. You want me to waltz up with a camera and hope he doesn't run? I want you to do whatever it takes, Sarah's voice cut in. She'd arrived at the prison an hour ago, summoned by Robert's urgent call. Please, Marcus. My brother dies tomorrow night unless we can give the governor proof he can't ignore. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. They could hear street sounds in the background, voices in Spanish, car horns, music from a nearby cantina. Tommy's been careful, Marcus finally said. He changes locations every few months. Doesn't use credit cards, doesn't have social media, doesn't do anything that creates a digital trail. Last I knew, he was living in a small town outside Puerto Vallarta, working construction under his false identity. Can you find him again? Maybe. Probably. But getting footage without him knowing? That's riskier. If he realizes someone's onto him, he'll disappear again. And this time, I might not be able to follow. We don't have a choice, Michael said. This is the only card we have left to play. Another pause. Then, all right, I'll try. But I need to know. If I get this footage, if I can prove he's here, what happens to Tommy? He faces charges for murder and fraud, Michael said. His father faces charges for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Justice happens. Good, Marcus said, because I've been sitting on this information for months, knowing what it means, knowing an innocent man is on death row. Part of me wishes I'd done this differently from the start. Give me 12 hours. I'll get you something. The line went dead. Sarah sank into a chair, her face pale. 12 hours. That puts us at... She checked her watch. 4 a.m. tomorrow. James's execution is at 6 p.m. 14 hours to file emergency petitions, get it in front of a judge, convince the governor to reconsider, Patricia calculated. It's tight, really tight. It's impossible, Michael corrected quietly. But it's the only shot we have. Robert looked at the clock on the wall. 4:37 p.m. In less than 26 hours, he would have to walk James Holbrook to the execution chamber, would have to watch the guards strap him to the gurney, would have to witness the injection that would stop his heart. Unless a miracle happened in Mexico. I'm going to see James, Robert said. He deserves to know what we're doing. Don't give him false hope, Michael warned. I'm going to give him the truth. That's all any of us can do now. James was lying on his bunk when Robert arrived at his cell, staring at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd already accepted their fate. Warden, he said, not moving. Come to tell me about my last meal? No. Robert waited while the guard unlocked the cell, then stepped inside. I came to tell you that we're still fighting. That got James's attention. He sat up slowly, his expression guarded. Fighting how? The governor denied the stay. We have an investigator in Mexico trying to locate Tommy Vickers. If he can get footage, proof that Tommy's alive and in hiding, we file emergency federal petitions in the morning, try to get an emergency stay from a federal judge. James stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, broken sound. So I'm supposed to what? Hope that some guy in Mexico can find a needle in a haystack, film him without getting caught, and get that footage back here in time for lawyers to write petitions and convince a judge to care? All before tomorrow at 6 p.m.? Yes, Robert said simply. That's insane. Yes. James stood, pacing the small cell like a caged animal. 3 steps to the wall, turn, 3 steps back. The rhythm of a man who'd walked these same steps for 12 years. Why are you doing this? James asked suddenly, stopping to face Robert. Really? Why do you care? Robert thought about how to answer that. About the reasons that made sense, the evidence, the investigation, the procedural failures that had led to this moment. But those weren't the real answer. Because I saw you with your dog, Robert said finally. And I saw something that I couldn't unsee. Innocence. Real innocence. Not the kind people claim in appeals, but the kind that just exists, without agenda, without calculation. He paused. Duke knows who you are, and dogs don't lie. James's eyes filled with tears. That's the stupidest reason I've ever heard for believing someone. Maybe. But it's the truth. James returned to his bunk, sitting heavily. If this doesn't work, if you can't stop it, I want you to make sure Duke goes somewhere good. Sarah will take care of him, I know she will. But he's 11 years old. He doesn't have much time left. I want... His voice cracked. I want his last years to be happy, even if mine aren't. You're going to tell him that yourself, Robert said. In 10 years, when you're out of here and he's sleeping on your couch as a very old dog. You really believe that? I have to, because the alternative is unacceptable. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the ticking clock pressing down on them both. Can I ask you something? James said finally. Of course. Do you think I'll see him again, Duke, before tomorrow? Robert hadn't considered that. The execution protocol was strict. Final visits had to be scheduled days in advance. Security requirements meant animals were almost never allowed on execution day. But he thought of Duke's gray muzzle, of James's hands in his fur, of the reunion that had been too brief. I'll make it happen, Robert said. Whatever I have to do. If tomorrow comes and we're out of options, I'll bring Duke to you one more time. Thank you. James's voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for that. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Robert stayed at the prison, sleeping in fitful bursts on the couch in his office. Sarah remained as well, camping out in the conference room, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The lawyers worked through the night, preparing petitions for every possible scenario, ready to file the moment they had something, anything, to file with. At 3:47 a.m., Marcus Reed called. I've got him. The conference room, which had been quiet with exhausted waiting, exploded into motion. Sarah lunged for the phone, putting it on speaker. You found Tommy? Found him, filmed him, and got out clean. He's living in a compound outside Puerto Vallarta. Nice place, ocean view, clearly financed by someone with money. I set up a long-range camera on a hillside yesterday evening and waited. Got footage of him on the balcony this morning. Clear face shots. No question, it's him. Can you send it? Patricia was already opening her laptop. Sending now, but there's more. Marcus's voice carried a grim satisfaction. I also got footage of a visitor Tommy received yesterday. Want to guess who? Who? Michael demanded. Richard Vickers, former Senator Richard Vickers, flying down to check on his son. I've got them together on camera, talking, laughing like they don't have a care in the world while James Holbrook sits in a cell waiting to die. The room went silent. You're sure? Diana asked. Absolutely certain it's the senator? I'm sending you 12 minutes of footage from 3 different angles. You tell me if I'm certain. Patricia's laptop chimed. The video files began downloading, large, high-resolution files that would take several minutes to transfer completely. Marcus, you beautiful bastard, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Just doing my job, ma'am. Now you do yours. Get that man off death row. As the files finished downloading, they crowded around Patricia's screen. The first video showed a man who was unmistakably Tommy Vickers, older than his last known photos, tanned and fit, wearing expensive casual clothes. He stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean, drinking coffee, looking relaxed and content. The second video showed the same balcony, but now there were 2 men. Tommy and an older man with distinguished gray hair and the kind of posture that spoke of decades in politics. Richard Vickers, in Mexico, with his son. The son who was supposed to have disappeared 12 years ago. That's it, Michael breathed. That's our evidence. That's proof of conspiracy, obstruction, fraud, everything we need. How fast can you file? Robert asked. Patricia was already typing. Federal emergency petition for stay of execution based on newly discovered evidence of actual innocence. I can have it filed within the hour, but we need a judge willing to hear it. Judge Martha Reynolds, Diana said immediately. 5th Circuit. She's ruled in favor of stays before, and she's known for taking evidence of innocence seriously. She's also 300 miles away, Michael pointed out. So we file electronically, request an emergency hearing by video conference, and pray she's willing to look at it. Patricia's fingers flew across the keyboard. If she grants a temporary stay, that buys us time to present the full case. And if she doesn't? Sarah asked. No one answered. The petition was filed at 4:52 a.m. By 6:30 a.m., they'd received confirmation that Judge Reynolds had agreed to an emergency hearing at 9 a.m. By 7:15 a.m., Robert had called the Department of Corrections Central Office, informing them of the pending hearing and requesting a temporary hold on execution preparations. By 8 a.m., the press had gotten wind of the story. News vans began arriving at the prison, reporters setting up cameras, the execution that was supposed to be routine suddenly becoming a national story. And at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the hearing, Robert brought Duke back to see James. They met again in the courtyard, in the soft golden light of early morning. James looked like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't, but his eyes were alert, hopeful in a way they hadn't been the day before. Duke whined the moment he saw James, pulling at the leash with the same desperate urgency. Sarah let him go, and the dog bounded across the grass, and James caught him, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Hey, buddy," James whispered into Duke's fur. "We might actually make it. We might actually get out of this." Duke licked his face, tail wagging so hard his whole back end shook. "If we do," James continued, "I'm never letting you out of my sight again. Never. You hear me? We're going to be together every single day for the rest of our lives." The dog's tail wagged harder. Robert checked his watch. 8:54 a.m. "We need to go. The hearing starts in 6 minutes. James stood reluctantly, his hand trailing down Duke's back one more time. "I'll see you soon, boy. I promise." They left Duke in the courtyard with Sarah and hurried to the conference room where the video hearing was being set up. The screen flickered to life, showing Judge Reynolds' chambers, wood paneling, law books, the flag of the United States of America standing in the corner. Judge Martha Reynolds was 73 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had witnessed decades of human tragedy. She looked at the camera with an expression that gave nothing away. "This is Emergency Petition 247719, Holbrook v. Texas, seeking stay of execution based on newly discovered evidence. Deputy Attorney General Zhang, you filed this petition. Present your case." Michael stood, centered himself in front of the camera, and began to speak. He presented the evidence methodically, the investigation Sarah had funded, the witness statements that had been buried, the financial records showing payments from Richard Vickers to his son, and finally, the footage. 12 minutes of video showing Tommy Vickers alive, well, and living in luxury while James Holbrook waited to die for Tommy's crime. When the video finished, the conference room was silent. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, her expression still neutral. "Mr. Zhang, this evidence is indeed compelling, but I need to understand why it's being presented now, hours before the scheduled execution, rather than through normal appellate channels." "Because the normal appellate channels failed, Your Honor," Michael said. "This evidence was presented to state courts and was denied on procedural grounds. The governor declined to intervene. The system, with respect, has failed to serve justice in this case." "And you believe James Holbrook is actually innocent?" "I know he is, Your Honor. The evidence is overwhelming." Judge Reynolds turned her attention to the screen showing the state's attorney, a harried-looking man who'd been pulled from bed to defend the execution. "Mr. Carson, response." The state's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while this footage is certainly interesting, it doesn't conclusively prove James Holbrook's innocence. It proves that Tommy Vickers is alive and that his father visited him. But it doesn't prove that Mr. Vickers, rather than Mr. Holbrook, pulled the trigger 12 years ago. It proves that the key witness disappeared with his father's assistance," Michael countered. "It proves a conspiracy to obstruct justice. It proves that James Holbrook's defense was compromised by evidence that was intentionally hidden." "Your Honor," Carson pressed, Mr. Holbrook has been convicted, sentenced, and his conviction has been upheld through multiple appeals. This court should not intervene in a state execution based on evidence that, while suggestive, does not meet the threshold of clear and convincing proof of innocence. Judge Reynolds was quiet, studying something on her desk, probably the video footage, probably the petitions and evidence that had been filed. The silence stretched. Robert found himself holding his breath. Finally, Judge Reynolds spoke. "This is an extraordinary situation. The evidence presented is substantial enough that I have serious concerns about proceeding with this execution. However, I am also cognizant of the state's interest in finality and the importance of not interfering with state judgments without compelling cause." She paused, and Robert felt his heart plummet. "Therefore," Judge Reynolds continued, "I am issuing a temporary stay of execution, effective immediately for a period of 60 days. This will allow time for a full evidentiary hearing, for the state to investigate these allegations, and for this court to determine whether James Holbrook's conviction was obtained through fraud or misconduct. If, at the end of that period, the evidence supports his innocence, I will order a new trial. If not, the execution will proceed." The conference room erupted. Sarah was sobbing. Michael was gripping Patricia's shoulder. Diana was already on her phone calling press contacts. Even James, stoic, resigned James, had tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Your Honor," Michael managed. "Thank you." Judge Reynolds's expression softened slightly. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Zhang. This is a stay, not an exoneration. James Holbrook is still a condemned man. The difference is that now he has time to prove he shouldn't be." The screen went dark. Robert stood, his legs unsteady, and looked at James. "You're not going to die today," he said simply. James nodded, unable to speak. "Let's go tell Duke." They returned to the courtyard together. Robert, James, Sarah, and the small army of lawyers who'd fought through the night. Duke was waiting where they'd left him, sitting patiently beside Sarah's chair, his eyes fixed on the door. The moment James appeared, the dog was on his feet. And this time, when Duke ran to his person, there was no clock ticking down, no deadline approaching, no execution waiting in the wings. There was just a man and his dog, reunited against impossible odds, with time stretching ahead of them like an unexpected gift. James collapsed to his knees, and Duke crashed into him, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs and fur and joy so pure it hurt to witness. "We got more time, buddy," James sobbed into Duke's neck. "We got more time. I'm not leaving you. I'm not going anywhere." Duke's whole body vibrated with happiness, with relief, with the simple animal understanding that his person was here, was safe, was staying. Sarah knelt beside her brother, her arms wrapping around both of them. A family reunited, incomplete, but together. Robert turned away, giving them privacy, and found himself facing the gathered lawyers. They looked exhausted, triumphant, relieved, and terrified all at once. Because they knew, as he knew, that this was just the beginning. 60 days to build a case. 60 days to find more evidence. 60 days to convince a court that 12 years of legal precedent should be overturned. It was daunting, it was terrifying, but it was possible. And possible after so many years of impossible felt like a miracle. 3 months later. The courtroom was packed for the evidentiary hearing. Tommy Vickers had been extradited from Mexico and was currently being held without bail, facing charges of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. His father, former Senator Richard Vickers, sat in the gallery with an expression of stony dignity, knowing his political career was over but clinging to whatever scraps of reputation remained. James Holbrook sat at the defense table, no longer in prison jumpsuit but in a suit Sarah had brought him, the first real clothes he'd worn in 12 years. Duke lay at his feet, wearing a service vest that technically allowed him in the courtroom, though everyone knew the real reason he was there. because James and Duke had already been separated once. No one was going to let it happen again. The hearing lasted 4 days. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. Tommy Vickers, offered immunity in exchange for testimony, finally told the truth. How he'd planned the robbery, how he'd panicked and killed the clerk, how his father had orchestrated his escape and paid for his silence. "I let an innocent man take the fall," Tommy said from the witness stand, his voice flat. "I let him sit on death row for 12 years because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. And my father made it easy. He made it possible. He told me it would blow over, that James would get off on appeal, that no one would really suffer." "But someone did suffer," Michael said quietly. "Yes." Tommy looked at James for the first time since the hearing began. "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't give you back those years. But I'm sorry." James didn't respond. His hand had found Duke's head, fingers moving through the familiar fur, grounding himself. On the 5th day, Judge Reynolds delivered her ruling. "After reviewing the evidence presented, I find that James Holbrook's conviction was obtained through prosecutorial misconduct, witness intimidation, and deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence. Furthermore, the testimony of Thomas Vickers provides clear and convincing proof that James Holbrook did not commit the crime for which he was convicted." She paused, looking at James with an expression that might have been compassion. "Therefore, I am vacating James Holbrook's conviction and ordering his immediate release from custody. The state may choose to retry him if they wish, but given the evidence, I would strongly discourage that course of action." The gavel fell, and James Holbrook, for the first time in 12 years, was a free man. 6 months later. The farmhouse was small but comfortable, set on 5 acres of land outside Austin. Sarah had helped James find it, a place far enough from the city to feel peaceful, close enough to civilization to not feel isolated. James stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, Duke pressed against his leg in the familiar position he'd maintained ever since James's release. The dog was slower now, 12 years old, arthritic, his muzzle completely gray. The vet had said he had maybe a year left, maybe less. But he was here. And James was here. And after everything they'd been through, that felt like enough. "You ready for dinner?" Sarah called from inside, where she was visiting for the weekend. "In a minute," James called back. He crouched down, bringing himself eye level with Duke. The dog's tail wagged, slower than it used to, but still enthusiastic. "You saved my life," James said quietly. "You know that, right? If you hadn't waited for me that day, if you hadn't made the warden see something he couldn't ignore, I'd be dead right now." Duke licked his face. "I'm going to make the rest of your life perfect," James promised. "Whatever time we have left. Every single day is going to be good. No more cages, no more separations. Just us. Just this." The dog's tail wagged harder. They stayed like that as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A man and his dog. A bond that had survived death row, a broken justice system, and 12 years of separation. Some people said it was evidence that freed James Holbrook, but James knew better. It was love. Simple, uncomplicated, unwavering love. The kind that only a dog could give. The kind that changed everything.